Hello there everybody, welcome back to my channel, beautiful, how are you doing today? My name is Joesephyr, and in today's Dissidia Final Fantasy Opera Omnia Should You Pull video, we're going to be discussing the 6-man quest that's going to be coming up next Wednesday, as well as Yuri's brand new FR and BT, and another character that's coming around without any new gear that actually takes the cake on arguably one of the best characters in the game. So if you want to find out more about those and more characters as well, then of course as always stay tuned and keep on watching. Now before we get started, I do just want to point out, before we talk about social media and all of that, that sadly my Xenoblade Chronicles 3 subathon had to be cancelled as soon as it started, because my internet provider decided to screw the pooch and ruin my internet for the day, which was not ideal. However, we are going to still be doing it. Instead, we're going to be doing it on the Monday, so this coming Monday instead of the Friday. And any of the lovely support that I've gotten, so big shout outs there to Lady Janessa, Mark Stuff, and to Unholy Taco as well for the subs that they've already given out for that particular thing, will be applied to the subathon by the start of it, so that it's still going to count for anything that we're doing. We're going to do a little bit extra, so I'm so sorry that it's gone that way. It's extremely embarrassing for me, but hey, it is what it is, and there's nothing that can be done about it now, so we're just going to re-cleanse and enjoy the time on Monday instead of Friday. Thank you very much for your patience and your understanding. And of course, don't forget to check out all of my other social links in the description box below, where you can find me on Twitch or on Discord or on all sorts of other places. Over on Patreon, I do always shout out one of my patrons to all of my lovely patrons that support this channel and keep it going for what it is. And I shout out one of those people every time I release something. And today that person is going to be Gail, who has been a supporter of mine for a little while now. And a massive thank you goes out to you and to everybody else, because without you guys, I wouldn't be able to even attempt to do some of these things. So a massive thank you for all of you. Don't forget, lastly, to check out all of the other creators and resources out there for Dissidia Opera Omnia as well, because they deserve your love too. So let's get to looking at these banners then, shall we? So, the first banner that we're going to talk about here is going to contain Yuri, his FR, and the return of Eald'narche and his BT and LD, and then we're also going to see Rydia and Yuffie come back with their LDs. Now, Rydia only comes back with her LD and her Force enhancement here, no rework or anything for her. However, her LD call is still very, very useful in numerous situations, including in this event here. The other banner is going to contain Yuri and his entire kit, including his brand new BT, his LD if you didn't get it the first time, and Gladiolus and Arciella are going to be coming around with their LD kits again. Now, Arciella is the character that only gets Force enhancements here, but again, her kit is still pretty useful. Like, she does a lot more than she used to. She still has her HP silence, which can be very useful in certain situations. But we're going to talk about Yuffie and Eald'narche to begin with. Now, the reason that we're going to talk about them is because they're not the stars of the show. Let's put it that way. Yuffie gets additional HP dumps across the board, and they're not anything super crazy. Yuffie LD is one that was released later on, and it applies the Doom of the Living debuff, which does more depending on how many other debuffs are on the enemy, and she obviously does quite a lot with her I don't need this debuff, including throwing back any debuffs that they've applied to you, and that gimmick is still very much alive and kicking. So if you like that gimmick in certain situations where it's useful, there aren't that many of those these days. Like, the days of being able to throw back ridiculous HP poisons onto Dullahan are been and gone. But the EX is certainly very useful still, and now it has 7 HP dumps, and it still applies the ability to stop the enemy from buffing themselves, is relevant. Would I go pulling for Yuffie now though? Probably not. Like, I think she's good if you already have her, but she presented on a banner that is most certainly the less desirable of the two. Like, Rydia's nice if you don't already have her. There's lots of characters. If you've had Raijin, then you're probably going to get a similar kind of thing out of Rydia. Just bear in mind that obviously the way that Rydia's LD call benefits you is through a buff, whereas Raijin's is a debuff, and obviously those kinds of things are slightly different. Eald'narche, on the other hand, Eald'narche is weird in that his kit directly goes against what we want from Shinryu. So Eald'narche gets all of his HP buffs increased, so basically you get triple HP dumps on Phase Shift, Stellar Burst, Uranos Cascade, Omega Javelin. If you haven't used Eald'narche before, he's a bit weird in that he has a certain number of skills until you use Phase Shift, at which point he regenerates all of his skill uses and changes them. And he also just gets more like defensive buffs before he uses them and more offensive buffs after them. So Exoplates now has bravery consumption reduction during every HP attack, so you're using less bravery than you would be. So similar to like Golbears, things like that, we've seen that plenty of times at this point. And he has his abilities Warp and Terror, which are similar to Realm if you've used her, in which after the enemy has acted, Eald'narche will jump in front of them and take a turn for himself that's free. And then Exceed Lance here has more HP dumps on it and the ability to deal more HP damage based on the number of debuffs the enemies have. His EX, you start with his EX, which is useful and gives you 4 HP dumps and gives you a free ability use on the next turn, which increases his longevity and has more recast rate up. And his BT Plus is helpful-ish. Like, it's still not amazing in that basically what you want from this is that your duration of Warp, Terror, things like that are inflicted by Eald'narche don't decrease during enemy turns. And you get HP damage cap up now per debuff inflicted on enemies, which is something we've seen before on the likes of Kefka. The problem Eald'narche has is that in Force Time, which is realistically when all of your damage is going to be coming about, you're going to want to be more consolidated with the amount of damage you're dealing. So his biggest attack that he possibly has is 5 HP dumps, which is off of his LD. Otherwise, you're getting 3 or 4, depending on whether you're using a basic skill or his EX. Which realistically, during either a burst phase or after a free turn, isn't really cutting the mustard these days. Like, if you really like Eald'narche, sure, it can work. But if you want to make the most of Force Time, you want characters that can deal a lot more damage than this without relying quite so heavily on off-turn damage dealers. And if you're taking those off-turn damage dealers, you still want more HP dumps during your on-turn damage because, well, during Force Time you want as much damage as you can get. And sadly, Eald'narche isn't really providing that. Warp and Terror is all well and good. It's useful. But when you're like chipping at turns to make Force Time work, it's just not as cohesive as it was once before. So now we're going to take a look at the other banner here, which is Yuri and Gladio and Arciela's banner here. And I didn't mention, big shout outs to MediU for their translations, of course, as always. I love Yuri. I do. He is not the star of this banner. Definitely not. Gladiolus absolutely takes the cake with his rework, and he doesn't actually have any additional weapons to pull for, which is the nice thing because he was pretty silly the first time he came around, and lots of veterans have Gladiolus available, and if you don't, you're probably gonna want him. I'm just gonna put that out there. So Gladiolus's thing is he's a cover tank, much like Galoof and Oren, but his counters are done through his LD, which gives him the blink buff, and previously this was given to him for 3 turns, and you would use this and he takes no damage, bravery or HP, and he can't be debuffed, and he retaliates with a HP damage counter. Really, really good stuff. Well, his rework absolutely goes above and beyond what he had before. So Tempest and Dawnhammer, which are his buffing moves, give you the King's Shield buff, give you like just party-wide HP regen, defenses, attack, all the kind of thing you'd expect from a cover tank. And you get 3 HP dumps from either of them, which is alright, nothing special. Impulse. First things first, you get an extra skill use out of it. Crazy. You get Perfect Guard, or Blink as it's known in Global, for 6 actions when you start the quest, so you don't even have to use it. You get 4 HP dumps out of it, and you get Perfect Guard or Blink extended by 5 turns. That is 8 turns after the 6 turns that you've already had 4 times. That's stupid, considering what it applies to Gladio. And his counter also now has 2 HP dumps and 50% splash damage on it, so he has AoE damage to boot. So bear in mind that Gladio is quite literally invincible during those times. Like, he can't take bravery damage, he can't be debuffed, and he can't take HP damage. There's very few things that can break through his blink abilities. It's crazy, crazy good. His Royal Guard buff, which he applies to his party members for 10 turns each, is more likely to run out now than blink itself, because that buff is what provides the cover. As long as they have that buff, he will cover them. And he also provides bravery and HP damage resist on top of that, so AoE attacks, you're going to be taking less because Gladio's not taking anything, and you're taking less from AoEs because he's resisting the damage for those party members as well. And then the counter also happens to have a debuff on it that gives attack and defense down. It's always had that, but it definitely makes a difference. Like, attack 40% down on top of all of this resistance stuff is pretty ridiculous. It's very well known that in JP, Gladio is used alongside Core to make a very powerful core with an E of defensive maneuvers where you can use Gladio and Core just to shred enemies during their own turn. Stick Reno next to them, crack his FR out, and go off. It's absolutely ridiculous how much defense and offense those two provide for you. But you don't have to have Core to make Gladio good. He is so powerful on his own. It's insane. I honestly have not a bad word to say about this character. He is that good. It goes to show that he's still used to this day in JP with good reason, and he doesn't get any further reworks than what he gets here. His EX also gets a recast rate up. You get all of the stuff from the start of the quest, so you get his Trial of Gilgamesh and his King's Shield from the start. Royal Guard starts up from that, and you can actually reapply it through his EX, so that's not going to run out anytime soon either, so you're not going to worry about that. And then Trial of Gilgamesh, which is Warrior's Trial as it's known in Global, now gives you Brave gains up for the party, gives you more HP and Bravery damage up for the party, and more attack for the party as well, so you've now got just great buffs, and this is the one that gave you HP regen as well for a decent amount, like 20% when it's at its max stacks, which is based on how many times Gladio has been attacked. Crazy character. Honestly, he's so pick up and play now. I can't recommend him enough for practically every player in the game. No, he doesn't do as much damage as Auron or Galoof on his counters. When it comes to Blink, does it really matter? So now let's talk about Yuri. Now, Yuri is the character that gets all the new gear in this particular banner, and he gets an FR and a BT and a rework to his stuff. So Yuri previously, his main role was to provide HP and Brave regens through his EX buff, which is nice, and it now doesn't really run out since his LD came out in his C90, it doesn't really run out. You get 8 turns of Chilinka, and honestly, I actually really like Yuri before we go off and anything, because I thought Ring of Fates was fierce, and I know nobody else really played it. I would love to see a costume where Yuri and Chilinka swap over and you can play as Chilinka instead of Yuri, but that's not going to happen, so we'll go with Yuri. He gets a rework here, so Crystal Power and Rella Crystal give you additional HP dumps, and you get Brave Consumption Reduction during HP attacks, same like before, good stuff here. His LD changes in quite nice ways that make him able to, even if not all the time, deal some pretty ridiculous damage under the right circumstances. So the way his LD works is it gives him a buff that makes it so that he puts a debuff that stacks on enemies every time he attacks them while he has that buff. If the enemy's turn goes off while they have that debuff, it will trigger a trap, either Holiga or Holiga Plus, or you can trigger it yourself by using his Bravery command. Now, Holiga now, if they have the Ringhold debuff inflicted, which is the debuff that, or the lock as it's called, it's the debuff that stacks and gives you either Holiga or Holiga Plus when it's capped out on its stacks, it's now instant turn rate. And if you have Holiga Plus, which is if you've attacked them enough to provide the capped out debuff, it's now a 7 HP dumping attack. If you envision there being 2 enemies, bear in mind that a lot of Yuri's attacks are AoE, you're going to build up those stacks quite nicely. So you get an HP attack that is a 7 HP dumping attack, Holy and Magic, so Holy is a thing, we'll come to that as well when we talk about his FR, and that's going to be instant turn rate. So you then move on to the other one and do exactly the same thing again, and then you do an AoE attack and you build it all back up again. It can amount to a lot of damage. It's situational, but it can be really good. Yuri's FR, I think, is a little underwhelming. It's mainly because of the era or the time period that we're coming up to. It's party-wide Holy Enchant, which is mandatory for his Force Time effect. But I think, well, it's part of his Force Time effect. I actually don't think it's mandatory for it. I think that I'd actually kind of rather it didn't have this, because if I was going to use Yuri here, I'd want his full kit and I'd want to use his burst phase along with the Holiga plus spam so that I could get over with that. But when a turn passes with HP healed for a certain amount, this is HP regen, so this is always going to proc, so that's kind of nice. 30%. And when a turn passes with a Holy Attack command, or when a Holy Attack is triggered outside of own turn, 5%, and it's an extra 20% if Yuri's attacking. It is nice. I think it's the first situation where you get additional percentage if the character in question is doing the attack. Palom is the partner, which I could do without. I'm not a big fan of Palom, but hey ho. And you get full gravity as well during the attack. It can be really good. Like if you're attacking with Yuri and you're getting those Holiga plus spams in, I've been really looking into Yuri because I really like him. Then you can actually do a lot of damage if you've put him alongside a off-turn damage dealer like Cissnei or Kayn, because it's building up even more little bits and pieces. The reason I say the party-wide Holy Enchant is a problem is because we are rapidly approaching the period of time where elemental lockout content is a thing. And Holy is a very common element as well. So the fact that Yuri kind of instantly shuts his own FR out, and a lot of his own kit realistically in that content, unless Holy is applicable to it, is an issue for him. And that's kind of sad, especially when you consider his BT and quite how useful this can be, although there are alternatives to it. So this gives you 50% brave damage, 30% HP damage, and 30% brave cap, 50% brave cap, 30% HP cap, all fabulous. The reason you want it is that the enemies have 100% accuracy down while he has the BT aura. Now there are attacks that have auto hits. There are a lot more that don't. So this includes force attacks, this includes counter attacks, as is made relevant by the quest that comes along with Yuri. If your enemies like to jump turns or attack when it's not their turn and stuff like that, including force attacks, this BT aura, you can just sit there and sit back and just go, none of this is going to affect me. I don't have to care about any of this. And it's really useful. But the fact that the rest of his kit is so locked into Holy is kind of like a downer. It's not right now. It's really good right now. But in terms of longevity, especially when coming out alongside or just after Lunafreya and just before Tifa, Minwu, and Rinoa. Minwu is also Holy heavy, so people are probably gonna lean more towards Minwu than they would towards Yuri, because Yuri's trap isn't really a trap, it's something you trigger yourself realistically. And the blind aura is really powerful, but his damage is a lot more situational than Minwu's. So I really like him, despite all of the things that I think do make him less desirable than some of the other characters around. I think he looks really cool and fun, and I think the fact that he has instant turn rate shenanigans, but in a specific way, makes me really like him, and I'm looking forward to experimenting with his FR and what I can get out of it while I still can before the elemental lockout content comes out, and even after it. Minwu's content isn't going to lock out Holy when Minwu's there, but then I really want Minwu, so I'm probably just going to use Minwu. But I think that while I think Yuri's really good, I think that he's probably not a priority pick for a lot of players. So now let's take a look at the event that comes along with Yuri and his BT and FR, etc. And that's going to be the next area for the 6-man quests. So in this particular fight, we have 2 enemies. You're allowed to take 6 members, like we've done with before with the Beta one and Camernauts one with Area 1. You have the Dullahan and the Whale Zombie. So these guys are very mechanic heavy, but because their HP is 90 million, you can actually bypass the majority of it with careful planning and a good BT phase. And that's how I feel a lot of people will tackle these 6 warrior quests. A lot of the time, it tends to be 3 characters you want in your party for when you actually go off with the BT phase, and 3 characters who are there to basically be glorified friend units or glorified cool abilities, where they come in, inflict something, and then stand back ready for the actual damage phase, or they're setting you up to be prepared for it. So these guys are very debuff heavy. So the Dullahan in particular, with his force attack as well as his counterattacks that he can do, can inflict freeze, which is never a nice thing. We fought Dullahan before that could do that, and it makes it so you can't act until Dullahan goes again, so you're going to need to be careful of that, and just be careful with what he can do in terms of debuffing. He's also immune to paralysis, so you can't really use those shenanigans either. And that he can also inflict Ruin, which is a debuff that makes it so that you are delayed by a turn every time that you act. So you kind of want to try and avoid that. But the main mechanic with Dullahan is that he has two stances. Between 100% and 80%, 60 and 40%, and 20 and KO, he has an aura that has HP poison, and you have no brave gains for that period of time. When used between 80 and 60% and 40 and 20%, he instead counters every attack you do with an AoE Brave HP attack. And he will also enter that stance by using the freeze debuff as well through Absolute Zero. It's nasty stuff, but as long as you can push through a lot of it, you can actually just bypass a lot of this with a really well-timed BT phase. If you don't necessarily want to do that, bear in mind this is Yuri's event. So what it wants you to do is make blind or make it so that you can't get hit by the majority of this stuff. And when the Dullahan counters you, he doesn't jump turns. He just counters you. He just attacks out of turn. And there are multiple ways of bypassing this that don't involve Yuri, which, as I mentioned earlier, are reasons against Yuri to pull for him because they are quite common uses. So a well-placed Raijin LD call will sort that out. If you're not letting him take turns, then that's not going to run out because he doesn't jump turns to actually counter you. Rydia call is a really good way of doing it because you're going to dodge all of that. Edge is another way of dealing with it because as long as you time your EX correctly, then you're just not going to get hit by anything the Dullahan does. There are plenty of ways around that. Setsa, all sorts of different things, or a combination rather of Setsa and some sort of debuff immunity. That's going to help out quite a lot as well. There are plenty of ways for you to just stop this thing all in its tracks altogether. However, it is not the only mechanic you're going to have to worry about because the whale zombie also has a nasty aura around it as well. So the whale zombie has doesn't have anything super special about it except for the fact that between 80 and 60% and 40 and 20%, it has an anti-healing, like a reverse healing aura, which basically makes it so that any regens, healing, anything that you do that recovers HP hurts you instead to a minimum of 1 HP. The important thing to remember with this is that it can't KO you. Like, that aura cannot KO you. And if you're taking Yuri, you're taking big HP regens. So in an ideal situation, if you are looking to take out these enemies quickly, I would focus the Dullahan first, so that you can just get rid of all of the shenanigans with the counters and everything. You don't have to worry about that anymore. And then when you get the whale zombie down below 20%, but before you actually KO it, take Alexander with you. After 20%, it doesn't have the anti-healing aura anymore, and even if your entire party's on 1 HP, bring Alexander with you and it fully heals you when you summon it, and then that way you can just take it out from there. That's how I would personally deal with it and how I plan to deal with it. There are clears of this event that only use 3 characters, whether it's like, a lot of them are involving Yuri, some of them involve Edge, and Edge is actually very good for this. You can also just take your Luna Freyas, your Tiduses, etc. Do bear in mind, though, that because the enemy is immune to paralysis, although not Camnonaut's BT version of paralysis, and they're immune to launching, you may want to reconsider using Camnonaut for that. But if you can paralyze the Dullahan, he doesn't counter you when he is incapacitated or unable to act. So that's something you may want to consider as well. Basically, it's a very mechanic-heavy fight, like I said at the beginning, but if you want to, you can just push through it with a very heavy damage burst, because they only have 90 million HP, so if you've got a good FR burst phase, you could just blitz one entirely and then worry about the other one, or if you want to, like, just kind of abuse the fact that the Dullahan can counter you as much as it wants, you can do that too. Take Gladio with you. He can't be debuffed, he's practically invincible. Let him do all the work. So now it's time for Would You Pull, the section of the video where you, the viewer, get your chance to tell everybody whether you would or wouldn't pull on any given banner and why that may or may not be the case. So we're going to go straight into numbers as we try to do here, and obviously a big thank you to my patrons for their votes and their comments. We're going to start with Eald'narche's banner. Unsurprisingly, nobody is pulling on gems with this banner. 7% of people are saying yes to 100 or more tickets, 20% of people are saying less than 100 tickets, 33% of people are saying no thanks because they're not interested, and 40% of people are saying no thanks because they have everything they want that's not the FR. Now, I do want to make a quick mention here that obviously with recent banners and Ultimecia being one of those banners where a lot of people are saying no because they weren't interested, there's been some interesting developments when it comes to the JP side of things and Queener. So if you want to know more about that, basically Queener can set up an infinite loop for Ultimecia, which is like Ida Sephiroth, but dialed up to 11, so that's something you may want to consider pulling on before this banner goes live, if that's something that interests you. I think it's a bit of an oversight, and I wonder if maybe they'll figure out some way of undoing that, or maybe there'll be a new difficulty in JP that's going to change that up. I don't know, I just thought I'd point it out before we carried on. When it comes to Yuri's own banner, 8% of people are saying yes to gems, 28% of people are saying yes to 100 or more tickets, and then 20% of people are saying less than 100 tickets, and 44% of people are saying no thanks. This doesn't surprise me, to be honest. I like Yuri. He's far from a priority pick for very, very many players. I'll probably only going to throw tickets here because the FR really isn't that big a deal. It's decent, but it's not anything crazy, and Vayne and Core are both characters that I know I want, and they're going to have Yuri's BT on it, so I feel no reason to use gems here. So let's take a look at some of the comments that we've seen come about from this. So Chamberlain Skexis says, I'm pulling on the Yuri Gladio banner for Gladio and his crazy tanking. I'm not going for Yuri because his base kit's alright and he's a BTFR character, so you're going to need to spend some valuable resource to get full use of him. With his EX he gets party regen and his BT's really good with 100% hit rate down, but Kamari EX exists. The big problem I have is that he's smack dab off the heels of Luna Freya and right before Tifa, who's also getting FR boards in the future. He's not bad, he's great, he's just in an awkward spot. I think the Kamari EX being a valuable thing there is actually a noteworthy thing, but the most noteworthy thing here is that a lot of what you'd get out of Yuri BT you could get from something like Raijin LD Call. I know I've mentioned that before, but I think that because a call can kind of do what Yuri's biggest draw is, you don't really need Yuri because he's taking up a slot in your party, he's taking up a BT set of resources, and as much as I like him and I would probably like to use him if I can, there are ways of doing what he does without actually having to use Yuri or not even using him in using that character in your party. Silverhawk says, I've pulled every FR to this point, but Yuri is likely the one to end my streak. I just don't see much use for him with so much else around. I don't have any of his kits, so I'd be investing a lot to build him, and with Core and Tifa coming soon, I'd be wise to save for them instead. I've never heard Yuri discussed as a major meta unit, and I don't think that changes now. But for new players, I do suggest pulling for Gladio. He's an excellent defensive unit that you will want in your back pocket. Again, like, I agree with this 100%. Like, if you don't have Gladio, the value of this banner jumps exponentially. Like, if you do have Gladio, you are quite happy to skip this banner. Like, I mean, I like Yuri, and I'll keep saying it. I think he's really fun and really cool, but he is far from Luna Freya or Tifa levels of busted, and I think that that's poignant for a lot of players. But if you don't have Gladio, him you might want to pick up. And then lastly, Sergeant Tuffy says, I'm going to throw some cheeky tickets in for Yuri because it'd be a shame to hard pass on any BT character for me personally, but Gladio here is the real winner. The more tanks we have, the better, but everyone else is just kind of decent. If he were earlier in the FR era, Yuri would be an absolute winner, but the two BT units to come after him, barring GL shenanigans, are Tifa and Renoa. We do also have Minwoo between them as well. Tifa is a known quantity, but for those not in the know, Renoa gets an AoE 9 HP dump, BT HP plus, and an FR that grants 100% per turn for just doing the thing she was going to do anyway. It's just not a good time in the game right now to be only decent. I think that this depends on your perspective. Like, I think that while I've sat there and I've spoken about the game being like easy and you having to really try hard to make challenges for yourself, I do think that some players like playing characters that aren't the ultra powerful ones, like your Tifas, your Renoas, your Luna Freyas, etc. And I do think Yuri fits that bill quite well at being decent and good and strong enough to like tackle a lot of this content, but not game breaking in any way. I say this as someone who managed to fluff up the last event and laughing at myself for doing so, so don't worry, I understand the hypocrisy in the things that I've said. But I don't think that he's going to be taking your resources up where somebody like Tifa or Rinoa or Minwoo in the future would take your resources instead. I would only go for Yuri if you're looking at it from a purely objective point of view, if you have resources to spare. Okay, so that leaves us with the big question. Should you pull for Yuri, Gladio, Eald'narche, Rydia, Arciela, Yuffie? There's a lot of characters to cover in today's video. Now, let's focus on Yuri. Yuri's BT aura is actually really good. Like, for the same reasons as the likes of Raijin Call, Rydia Call. The difficulty with that is that it's attached to a BT and not an LD, which means that you're going to want to invest resources you probably didn't want to in Yuri, and he actually has to be in your party as opposed to using a call ability that'll do the job instead to actually benefit from it. But it's a pretty good BT all around anyway. It's definitely not up there with the likes of your Luna Freyas, etc., but it's still good. It still provides all the right numbers. It still provides a unique debuff because it's not a debuff. If an enemy is immune to debuffs, then Yuri has a place because that accuracy down is an aura attached to Yuri and not affecting the enemies at all. So that's something in his favor. And while he can be a bit specific on what he wants because he is locked to an element which is unfavorable later down the line, at least it's an element that gets used, and his instant turn 7 HP dump attack against multiple enemies, along with a BT phase and all of that, he can churn out a lot of damage, especially when paired up with a good off-turn damage dealer, because they do augment his FR. His FR is primarily meant for him and him only. It's not going to do a lot, which means that it's quite specific, so it's probably a bit underwhelming for a lot of players, considering the broad spectrum of FRs we now have. So, whether you're going to invest in Yuri or not, I think depends on how much you have in resources. If you're saving for Tifa, Minwoo, Rinoa, Core, etc., there are more pressing characters probably for you than Yuri. I personally really enjoy him. I think that Yuri has his gravity powers through his regular skills. He has an FR that works really nicely for him and with off-turn damage dealers. He works really well with characters that can just take advantage of the fact that they can't really get hit. So if you wanted to take Edge, or if you wanted to take somebody who has evasion-based skills, that's something to consider. I just think that Yuri is a very fun character. Just bear in mind that his star quality does lie in his BT. If you don't want to invest in a BT plus or a BT even, with your pulling resources, you probably shouldn't go for Yuri. Gladio you should go for. If you happen to get Yuri stuff, because luckily Gladio stuff is on Yuri's banner, so at least there's something guaranteed to be new on that banner for you, I can't not encourage you to pull for Gladio. He's just that good. He's never been outright bad since his release, just because of the nature of his blink buff. And the fact that his blink buff is practically indefinite now, 32 plus turns, in addition to the fact that he starts with it and doesn't have to set up with it anymore, it's so powerful. The fact that he can't be debuffed on top of the fact that he's not taking damage and protecting his party, it's so powerful. Cannot recommend him enough. Eald'narche I would skip, personally. I think that there are ways of making him work, but I don't think he does enough HP damage during each turn to make him worthwhile, and he therefore relies on a lot of outside damage dealing, which is beneficial to other characters just as much as it is to him, so I just wouldn't invest in him. And Yuri and Arciela are nice extras. So that's going to be all for today's video. Thank you all ever so much for watching, and I hope that you've gained some knowledge on Yuri and Gladio, and know now that you should probably pick up Gladio at some point if you haven't already. And I just wanted to say how much I enjoyed his kit before and how good he's going to be now. And Yuri, not a great pick for everybody, but I'd really like him. So thank you very much for watching that, and don't forget to like the video, subscribe to the channel, click the bell for notification of future videos I might be making. Hopefully with TGS coming up soon, we should get some more information on Ever Crisis, as I'm kind of waiting with a bated breath for that stuff, and hopefully we get something out of that. And yeah, well, hopefully the subathon goes well this time and it doesn't cut out my internet for me. That would be great. Thank you ever so much for watching, and I will see you next time, beautiful. Have a great day.